Tonight, an Action News 10 special report. Cuba in crisis. Why are thousands of desperate refugees leaving their homeland? Our news team was there just weeks before the crisis. And now, Action News 10's Amy Greer.
From Havana to Miami, from the refugee camp at Guantanamo Bay to the White House, the Cuba crisis is playing out before our eyes in a wrenching drama. For the past few weeks, you've watched the images on the nightly news. The surprising riots of August 5th. The human wave of rafts that began flooding out of Havana. The massive Coast Guard mission, the Gulf Coast's own cutter Chincoteague among them, rescuing thousands of desperate refugees from the Florida Straits. Is Fidel Castro's communist Cuba on the verge of collapse? And why are thousands willing to risk their lives for a chance at freedom? Photographer David Johnston and I found out firsthand as we traveled with Mobile's sister city delegation to Cuba. From Miami's international airport, it is almost routine. But traveling to Cuba can be the experience of a lifetime. For the dozens of Cuban exiles returning to visit loved ones, or a delegation like ours, taking a page in history. The morning finds us checking and rechecking our paperwork, declarations to the Treasury Department of how much money we're taking. Spending more than $100 a day is illegal. Passports, visas, all get a second look. Then we begin to watch the drama happening all around us. Cuban Americans have found a curious way of getting around the luggage limit of 44 pounds by wearing what they want to take home to loved ones. Lazara Leon showed us a dress loaded with dozens of pockets and 15 pounds of soap, kitchen utensils, and deodorant.
¿Por qué trae tanto? Because there's a lot I want to take that they won't let me. We can't get this there.
Others carry the one thing the United States does not restrict as severely: medical supplies. This 12-year-old girl was taking antibiotics, Band-Aids, and aspirin to her grandmother in Camagüey. Cesar Vega carried a similar bundle to his family, supplies Cubans have no way to buy because of the American embargo.
But unfortunately, you can't put family over politics, and a little bit of help just gets them by. But I do agree with the embargo. And the funny thing is, they also agree on the embargo also.
Even though it makes their lives so much harder?
Yeah, we want to get it over with.
What do you bring them every time? What do you bring them? What do they ask for?
Clothing, shoes, medicine, stuff like that.
Welcome aboard, ladies and gentlemen, and for your flight to Havana.
Our flight takes just 45 minutes. As we begin to land, anxious Cuban Americans are out of their seats. Ricardo Diaz was filming the moment, an exile visiting for the first time since the 1981 Mariel boat lift. Arriving here is something like arriving on another planet. Even the pilots tell us they're not allowed to go any farther than the terminal. And we get our first lesson that not everything is what it seems.
Most of the airplanes over on the left side, all the Cubana airplanes, are stationary. Lack of parts and lack of fuel. They're not going anywhere.
We walk onto the tarmac just 90 miles from the United States, but it feels like much more. There is no preparing for the first sights and sounds of this country.
So, is it the first time you traveled to Cuba?
Our tour guide gives us a glossy version of a city time seems to have forgotten. Havana is home to 2 million people. 1 of every 8 travels by bicycle. The government was forced to buy the bikes from the Chinese and ration them to citizens at 130 pesos each, when oil shortages made cars and buses nearly obsolete. 70% of the factories we pass are shut down. There is no electricity. From our first moments here, we realize we are exploring a country in crisis. Driving through Havana is a spectacular architectural adventure, just what you would imagine from a nearly 500-year-old city.
It's been very interesting for me to see the buildings that are here, and they're much more exotic than I expected. Of course, they're in terrible condition, but I'm sure they're considered valuable by the people who live here and worth preserving. Hope someday that they can have a chance to bring them back to life.
The walls of the old Castillo Mortal used to defend the city from invaders. Today, they testify to 400 years of Spanish domination. The view is a reminder of Cuba's more recent history as the jewel of the Caribbean. The skies and the waters are still as blue as the days pirates and explorers sailed these waters side by side. Our home for the week is the Havana Libre Hotel, the old Havana Hilton. The rooms are a step back into the early 1950s, when this hotel was Havana's finest.
No, I like you.
And embargo or not, our Cuban television brings us the latest in American programming. Pirated off a Miami satellite, of course, the Cuban government scrambles these broadcasts for anyone but those at the tourist hotels. Cubans get to watch only the 2 official state channels. Times are tougher than ever in Cuba. At least once a week, a government official, including Fidel Castro, goes on local television, urging the people to endure what's called the special period. You have to understand how devastating the Soviet collapse was on Cuba. The USSR accounted for a full 85% of Cuba's foreign trade, 40% of the entire economy. In fact, 3 years ago, when the Soviets pulled out their support and their money, Cuba's gross national product fell twice that of the United States during our Great Depression. Cuban school children are learning what the special period means. Rationed pencils and a single notebook for all their studies. There are no textbooks anymore. Free education to all was a goal of Castro's revolution. It succeeded. If they have the talent, any child can become a doctor, engineer, or computer technician. At 15, teenagers have the option of attending the University of Havana or a vocational school. These teenagers are taking the latter option, in this case, learning the transportation industry.
They have many different, they call them careers. They have different careers, so they've been there. But this one is not so wonderful, so high, because of the specialty, transportation. And in nowadays conditions with the country, there is no transportation, there is no oil.
From a teacher, we learned one of Cuba's many ironies. No transportation, no oil, but still the students learn this trade. The people are no longer trapped in ignorance, but what does their education guarantee them? Not always a job. And even the most skilled surgeon earns the same wage as a taxi driver, some 300 pesos a month, equal to about $2 American. It's a lesson Mobile teacher Reba Cunningham will take home to her students. Another is
the feeling that they love their country. They have a real strong warmth and deep desire for their country to do better. And they don't want to lose their social programs, but they do realize that their economy has got to improve in order to keep that.
Nearby, we find one of Havana's neighborhood nurseries. Parents leave their children for the day at no charge. It is another way Castro is making good on the promise of the revolution, to provide the basic needs of the individual in return for unswerving obedience. More and more often, though, the basic needs are not being met. We found another example at a Havana gas station. This man has pesos to buy a few liters of gas, but he's run out of ration cards to buy it. He told us he'd have to push it home and wait for the next ration card. The government allows about 40 gallons every 3 months. This attendant told us, though, some months there is simply no gas to buy. The streets seem like an antique car show. Automobiles are rare. Still, owners proudly show off their pre-embargo Chevys and Buicks. Even in its toughest times, Cuba in many ways is just what you would imagine. Cafe customers still listen to the beautiful tradition of the mariachis. Workers still cut sugarcane. Before Castro, sugar counted for most of the country's exports. Today, without Soviet fertilizer, crops are down, but still the primary Cuban product. That sugar creates the world's finest rum that still lines the store shelves. And in the tourist hotels, cigars like no others are still for sale. And you just might meet the man who makes them, like Francisco. He told us he's been rolling the huge leaves from Cuba's tobacco country of Santiago for 55 years, since he was 10 years old. We drive along the spectacular Malecon seawall, marveling at the view. But on these same streets, we're reminded an American in Cuba is very far from home. There are a few familiar sights, like the former United States Embassy. Since American diplomats fled in 1961, the building is run by the Swiss government. 2 or 3 U.S. interest officers are left to handle the thousands of Cubans who line up daily to apply for visas. Only 4,000 people a year, though, will be allowed to visit the United States. On a nearby sandlot, we find another small bit of home. Forget Abner Doubleday. The Cubans have claimed baseball as their national pastime. Here in the heart of old Havana is a tiny cafe and bar that's forever linked to one of America's favorite writers, Ernest Hemingway. La Floridita was his favorite place during his 20 years living in Cuba. It was here, in fact, the daiquiri was invented. In fact, Papa Hemingway made this place so famous, Esquire magazine named it one of the world's 7 best bars and cafes in 1943. In the nearby town of Cojimar, the Café La Terraza marks the place where Hemingway kept his yacht and the waters that inspired the classic novel, The Old Man and the Sea. And in the photographs on the wall, America's self-sworn enemy smiles alongside one of her most honored writers. Like baseball, Cuba has claimed Hemingway. The political divisions are deep, but we found the people only curious and happy to meet us, and eager to share their culture, in this case a music class. 11-year-old David became performer and ambassador all at once, in a quiet performance on the streets of old Havana.
Amor, este bar de alianzas, este par de anillos, con nuestros nombres grabados, este par de anillos, para dos enamorados. ¡No, qué lindo! ¡Bravo, bravo!
It began as a simple hand of friendship, but suddenly Mobile was in the national spotlight, the first American city to establish a relationship with Cuba since the 1961 embargo. Our delegation had to fit certain guidelines, as researchers writing articles for stateside publications, as fully hosted officials with trip expenses paid by Cuban officials, or as professional journalists. Most of our group would not have been able to go under the new White House Cuban policy.
Painting of Mobile children.
Queremos asegurarle que nuestro alcalde participará en la inauguración de esa exposición.
Inside Havana's City Museum, a historic alliance is made. Our delegation gets a warm welcome and a promise Havana school children are being taught about their new sister city far away.
The gardens,
las antiguas iglesias,
the antique churches,
el castillo,
the castle,
la casa del alcalde,
the house of the mayor.
Cómo era también una cosa maravillosa.
How wonderful it was.
La fiesta del Mardi Gras.
The party of Mardi Gras.
And in a communist nation, an American enemy for decades, Mobile finds common ground in the form of a small plaque on the floor. The burial place of a hero to both Havana and Mobile, Pierre Lemoine d'Iberville. The explorer died in Havana in 1706 after discovering the port city.
I looked at the people and I thought, now this is where Ponce de Leon stood in this room, and you know, in d'Iberville, who founded Mobile, stood in this room, and his grave is right downstairs below me. And there's been a tremendous amount of history in these 5 centuries right here in this room. So I just felt like, well, a little blip in history. I was in this room, and my people from Mobile were stretched out here beside me. We felt good about the exchange we had. And to me, it just adds a level of a life-enriching experience to be involved in something like that.
The two cities share a strong common history. Explorers like Columbus and De Soto walked the streets of old Havana before discovering the port city and the rest of the Gulf Coast.
In a sense, they sort of grew up together, because in the very beginning in 1702, Havana helped supply Mobile when it desperately needed help. And now that Havana desperately needs help, I think it's only fitting that we should extend a helping hand.
But Mobile is limited in what kind of helping hand it can provide. Trade and economic agreements to Havana are strictly off limits under the embargo. 35 years ago, though, it was a very different story.
there's hardly an article that doesn't have something on Cuba in it. You know, when you go through the years again from 36 to 59.
Mobile's international trade director, Bob Lager, told us at one time, freighters poured out of Alabama's state docks headed to Cuba, loaded with machinery, lumber, paper products. At one time, Cuba was Mobile's fourth biggest export destination.
Waterman Steamship had a large presence in Cuba. Colonial Sugar, Southern Industries had had a presence in Havana, which was nationalized.
The old Merchants National Bank building even held an office for a full Cuban consul to oversee Mobile-Havana trade. And the Port of Mobile bulletins are full of articles about trade to our island neighbor.
Here's a Havana-Nassau cruise out of the Port of Mobile. This is in '54. But the business stayed very good until Castro.
In the 1950s, though, Cuba was still an American playground. This ad in a 1939 Time magazine says visiting the country is so easy, you don't even need a passport. Meantime, the United States was buying up 70% of Cuba's foreign exports. 40% of that alone was azúcar, sugar. Jose Lacalle moved to Havana in 1947 as an executive with the Cuban-American Sugar Company, which owned the company that later was headquartered in Mobile, Colonial Sugar. He remembers well the day Castro and his revolutionaries marched into Havana from the mountains of the Sierra Maestra to overthrow the dictator Batista.
Havana and her people went wild. They surrounded him, engulfed him, clutched and clawed him. Fidel, our liberator, they roared. Fidel, our savior.
It wasn't long before Lacalle had a visit from Castro's new labor secretary.
And he said, well, now, you people used to tell us, the laborers, quote, what to do. Now we're going to tell you what to do. And it was rather scary because
Lacalle watched as Castro seized more and more power, realizing the days of thriving American business in Cuba were over.
He seizes the American-owned sugar plantations.
Since he was declaring his independence of the sugar industry, he never gave it any thought. But the year went by and the cane had to be cut and the sugar had to be produced. It was really 90% of the country's economy. He didn't have anybody in the fields to cut cane. And he had to get housewives, office workers, army people, others to go out in the fields and perform this very back-breaking work in the hot sun. They weren't ready for anything like that.
Within 2 years, Cuba had gone from the world leader in sugar production to dead last. In 1961, President Kennedy slapped a trade embargo on communist Cuba.
Fidel Castro completes his confiscation of an estimated $1 billion in United States-owned property.
Castro answered back, nationalizing thousands of American businesses, including Lacalle's Sugar Corporation. In 1964, the claims against Cuba totaled $2 billion. Those lost companies are worth well over $6 billion today. Havana's harbor now is quiet except for a few cargo ships, mostly from other communist countries. Ships that do Cuban business can't enter an American harbor for 6 months, a new restriction to the embargo. Technically, our countries are enemies, which makes our presence here seem even more unreal.
And I wanted to show the mayor.
Our Mobile delegation now walks a fine line, careful to make no political statement about the embargo. So is Mobile extending a hand of simple friendship? Or is the eye more on future commerce than friendly cultural exchange?
You know, at this point, I'm not dwelling on the economic enterprise part of this, but I will say that I did have one meeting in a room where there were heads of 23 different countries that were gathered here. And these 23 different countries aren't waiting. You know, these 23 different countries are moving fairly quickly to be a part of the investment here in this community. So I won't speak for the U.S., but I can certainly say that the other countries are, you know, aggressively getting involved.
Pedro Chavez was the mayor of Havana and our host during our visit. A few weeks later, he was voted out of office, but he sat with us for an interview and gave us his own interpretation of our visit.
The blockade is tighter. It's more criminal than ever before. Your presence in Havana has to be evaluated as a clear-cut indication of courage, not only on behalf of Michael, but the other members of his delegation who have challenged the critics, the pressures that have been exerted upon you not to come, so that you have come to learn about our Cuban reality.
De nombrarme ciudadano honorario de móvil, lo cual para mí es un altísimo honor.
At a ceremony inside Havana's 400-year-old museum, the alliance as sister cities is sealed. Mayor Mike Dow stands across from Pedro Chavez. When they first met, the two learned they shared a very common chapter in their lives. Both fought in Vietnam on opposite sides. On this day, though, the two are part of a different chapter in history. And Dow becomes the first American authority to establish official ties with Cuba in 33 years. In return, he receives a medal equal to the key to the city.
You do feel like you're a part of something happening, a part of history. It gives you a little bit of pride in the fact that you've had enough, really, courage to come together. Because I think until we can come together and have a deeper dialogue about things, there's always going to be a factor of fear, and there's always going to be a distance that's going to be very dangerous.
Cubans seem to spend much of their time in a state of frustrated expectation. We see it in the faces on the balconies, on the street, and waiting in the endless lines we find everywhere. In the park, a crowd waits 2 hours for a small cup of ice cream. The lines are shorter and shorter these days outside the familiar bodegas or neighborhood stores. That's because there is less and less to buy.
¿Siempre tiene lo que la gente necesita?
Bueno.
This woman tells us some days there are no rice or beans to sell. When the Soviets ended their economic subsidy in 1991, Cuba's economy collapsed in half. 9 of every 10 Cubans are not working now. The government calls them interrupted. And everything is rationed. Water is available only 4 to 5 hours a day. At the corner market, a Cuban is allowed 5 pounds of rice and beans, 4 ounces of coffee a month. A family sees chicken only 1 day a month, and some haven't seen beef in 2 or 3 years. Factories are either shut down or forced to run by daylight. Tractors have been replaced by oxen or horses. When we asked Cubans the problem, we heard one thing, the American embargo.
¿Qué piensa usted del embargo de los Estados Unidos?
The embargo is bad. They need to open it up. Cuba would prosper.
We have no rice, ham, meat, or oil. You never know when you'll get something to eat.
Soon a crowd is gathered around us, almost shouting their anger.
To buy milk, a bar of chocolate, we can't buy anything. We have nothing because all we have is money that's worth nothing. Look at this money. These pesos are worthless.
Cubans have learned to simply do without. For 15-year-old Murphy High School student Sarah Marston, it's a lesson she won't forget.
I think people aren't really prepared for Cuba in the amount of poverty. And I know that if I had known that people want so much and need so much, 3/4 of my bag would have been, stuff to give out. We have all, that we could ever want, and they have nothing.
The Cuban people are learning to resolver, or just get by, largely thanks to the black market, which is just about the only way to buy luxury items like soap or good clothing. For instance, a Cuban might pocket something he makes at a factory and sell it at 10 times the price. Or head out to the country where food is more plentiful, bring it back to the city and trade it for cigarettes, perhaps, with a neighbor. There is another way to buy better food and clothing, if your money is the right color, American green. Castro has created a strange double economy, allowing Cubans to own and do business with U.S. dollars as well as pesos. In the finer neighborhoods of Miramar, tightly controlled dollar stores sell things like razors, bath soaps, or toys, items nearly all Cubans do without. Those lucky enough to get greenbacks from stateside relatives are allowed only $1,000 a year. But that amount goes far in a country where an American dollar equals more than 150 Cuban pesos. Castro recently allowed a handful of entrepreneurs to enter private business. The shoe repairman in Old Havana, the artisans selling tourist attractions in a street market. They still must pay the state 30 pesos a day to rent a booth. Fishing boats are rare and owned by the state, so Cubans haul rod and reel and inner tubes out to the harbor for a day's catch. Spearfishing scuba divers also bring in barracuda and snapper, which ends up for sale on the street. It may be the closest totalitarian Cuba ever comes to capitalism.
¿Cómo están? Bueno, ahí más o menos.
So Cubans support one another in just dealing with daily life. Water is a precious commodity. One reason we found this group of men pulling a week's water supply. ¿Por qué necesitan? They told us in their neighborhood, water is available only every other day. So they make the weekly trek pulling a barrel from an aqueduct about 2 miles to their home. We found this man delivering oil to an apartment building. He told us it has more than one use. A housewife can use the aceite for cooking or to light a lantern during the typical Cuban power outage. Electrical blackouts are common at night to save power. Only the prostitutes walk the streets outside the tourist hotels, a burgeoning new class of entrepreneurs in a country that once boasted of its lack of crime. In stark contrast lies Cuba's other world, the bright glamour being mustered once again for foreign tourists. The legendary Tropicana is open for the first time since the revolution. The club is run by the state, but a Spanish investor writes the check. The beaches are also thriving. This is Castro's dream, to revive Cuba with tourism. Castro has another plan to put his country and his people back to work. Our Cuban hosts proudly show us the Contingente Blas Roca, one of Cuba's several micro-brigades.
In the western part of the country, in the provinces, you will find our contingents working.
Blas Roca was Castro's brainchild, the first micro-brigade founded in 1987. 6,000 men and women, interrupted workers from all walks of life, engineers, doctors, housewives, were gathered into this work brigade. On this day, they even made Mayor Mike Dow an honorary member.
Outstanding worker.
Blas Roca is now finishing work on a 5-star hotel, La Coiba, in downtown Havana. They already have a highway and 2 dams to their credit. The Blas Roca workers live together in their village. In return for work, they receive food, medical care, and education for their children. The Contingente is based on true Marxist ideals, as we learned from one of the work leaders.
El pueblo, los bienes materiales, las edificaciones.
We work for the town, education, better highways, agriculture. This is the fight. The fight, yes. The fight is to work, work, work.
We did not find such blind optimism in most Cubans, like this man, who we will call Pedro. He was not afraid to talk to us, but he was afraid to show his face. He says the police are always watching him.
Is it typical in a Cuban family for many generations to live juntos?
Yeah.
Padres con
Yeah,
hijos.
sometimes. It's not natural. It's necessary.
Pedro lives with his unemployed wife and mother and his unemployed brother, an engineer. He himself is a professional scuba diver, but he can't find work. So he sells homemade jewelry at a market near the tourist hotels.
I can't find a job. I have no friends. In the high society, and I have no friend boss.
You're not with the connected group?
No.
So you can't find a job?
Yeah, I can find a job. I speak full English, and I can't find a job. The problem is not Castro. The problem is around Castro.
The gobierno, the government, the system.
The people around him.
La sistema.
Yeah, not the system also. It's the people around him. The people around him want to live very well. And if him go down, they go down.
Pedro had one request of us, to send him some diving magazines. We promised not to let him down. Meanwhile, he dreams of someday getting out of Cuba.
From his stronghold in the wild Sierra Maestre Mountains, Cuba's Fidel Castro emerged triumphant after 2 years of guerrilla warfare against the Batista regime.
January 1st, 1959, Fidel Castro was in his glory. With a ragtag band of guerrilla revolutionaries, he had just conquered the 35,000-man Cuban army and forced the dictator Batista to flee the country.
A new leader is on the scene, Fidel Castro, in many ways an unknown quantity in his politics and policies, but certain to be dominant in Cuba's new era, just begun.
35 years and more than half a dozen American presidents later, Castro has endured. We search in vain for him during our visit to Havana. The closest we come is El Presidente's office building, where we're told he keeps an office and a bedroom on the 5th floor. A guard quickly whistles us away. It's been 30 years since the feisty Castro held thousands mesmerized with his speeches here in the Revolutionary Plaza. We're told he works 16 hours a day and never sleeps in the same place more than one night at a time. He was married once and has just one child, at least legitimately, Fidel Jr. Few Cubans know much more about him or ever see him anymore, except for his image on the occasional billboard about town. But he still holds this country in an iron grip.
Because there's a lot of internal problems that is very hard to explain.
We learned about Cuba's strange relationship with Castro from a man who once worked near his side. Until he retired 5 years ago, Jorge was a lieutenant colonel in Castro's army. As he drove us through Havana, we came to understand how the country once opened its arms to the man they called the Stallion.
In those years, we don't think anything about our personal life. We think more in dedicated to good things for the society, instead of looking for a good job or looking for a good career or a good car. That was really the general way of thinking of all our generation.
Jorge was a teenager during the revolution, but he remembers those days well. The Cubans were angry at the way former dictator Batista seized power illegally. They wanted reform, they got revolution, and Castro. In his early days as a Latin American hero, he even visited the United States in glory.
I came for good relation, for good understanding, for good economical relations.
In the next few years, though, Castro would thumb his nose at the United States and make friends with a new ally, Russia. Jorge told us after the Cuban Missile Crisis, Cubans knew their lives would never be the same.
People are very afraid. They are afraid of everything, huh?
Unlike a lot of Cubans, Jorge has managed to make a good life for himself inside the system. He has American contacts, and that means American dollars, and better food than most of his friends can afford. We find Jorge a rare example of comfort. From most Cubans, we heard stories only of fear. Fear of Castro's ever-present policia.
The police is terrible. We are not free. We have not free. We have no free word talk. I cannot say that I want. Cannot do that I like, but for that I am talking to you.
Many Cubans were too afraid to speak out, but we found the university students most outspoken, desperate about their futures. Even in these, the worst of times, Castro continues his public relations campaign with signs like this one, Yankee imperialists, we will never be afraid of you. More signs not only of hostility, but hypocrisy are everywhere. In the worst economic crisis Cuba has ever faced, Castro spent millions on new stadiums and buildings for the Pan American Games. His jingoistic Cuban slogans cover everything. He's made a cult figure of Che Guevara, the idealistic revolutionary who was at his side in the early days. It seems the repressed Cuban people have few outlets. One is their culture. We found a family of artists eager to share their work. Publicly, they're allowed only to display paintings like this one, a montage of traditional and politically correct Cuban symbols. Another outlet has become religion. In the early 1960s, Castro closed the Catholic churches and deported thousands of South American and Spanish priests. Today, the Cubans are experiencing a religious rebirth. Baptist and Methodist evangelists are building new congregations in Havana.
Our people in this moment need very much to have a faith. The church is bringing that possibility. But we need to work very much in that way to evangelize our people.
Nosotros tenemos padre y tenemos madre. Entonces, Oricha Oko es mi madre.
Even more Cubans are devoted to the mysterious worship of Santeria, a mixture of Catholicism and voodoo. Our guide Jorge introduces us to Raul, a Santeria spiritualist. He tells us the religion celebrates 7 primary saints. His assigned saint is Alchun, whose portrait hangs in his living room. Raul prays to her when he has problems, asking for prosperity, safety, or good health.
¿Es muy secreto? ¿Es muy escondido?
No es que sea secreto ni escondido, es que es imposible.
No, it is not a secret thing. Many people don't believe in it. They say they don't believe in anything. But in a moment of stress, there's a realization. The door is open, and they understand.
Jorge tells us Santeria helps Cubans deal with the struggles of daily life.
Because it's a religion for every day. The Catholic, the Christians, is a religion after death. But the Santeria is a religion of the everyday.
For many, the answer is not religion, it is the United States. ¿Quiere usted salir? ¿Quiere usted salir?
Salir.
¿De los Estados Unidos? ¿Quiere?
Me gustaría mucho.
¿Quería ir a
I
los
have no
Estados
money,
Unidos?
nothing. Yes, I'd like to go. It's the country of opportunity, they tell me.
De las oportunidades, como se dice.
I hope to get Miami and stay here, never come back.
You want to go to the United States?
Yeah, I never come back. It's the best way to get better my situation.
It's just to leave.
Because in Cuba it's impossible.
In 1980, Castro opened the port of Mariel and allowed Miami exiles to send boats for their relatives. 125,000 desperate refugees fled the country. Last year, one of those exiles was Castro's own illegitimate daughter, Alina. During our visit, some 50 Cubans hid inside the Belgian embassy seeking asylum. And just a few weeks later, riots along the Malecon led Castro to promise anyone who wants to leave can go. It is the United States' newest foreign policy crisis, how to handle thousands of refugees. For the head of Mobile's Sister City program with Havana, there's no question but to support openness with Cuba.
We're not endorsing any government. After all, it's Cuba's business what government they choose. We don't ask them what government we should follow. So I don't think we should have anything to do with what type of government. If they violate human rights, we can express our displeasure. And we have before, and we shall do it again. But it's not any of our business what type of government they have.
During our visit, our delegation was invited by Fidel Castro to meet with him. Mayor Mike Dow turned him down. We'll be right back. Cuba today is putting her best foot forward even in the midst of chaos. As a VIP delegation, we were treated to the finest Cuba has to offer, like the pageantry of a salsa dance at a Havana nightclub. It's part of Castro's tourist ploy and another of his many ironies. The man who so hates Americans is desperate for American dollars. Castro and Cuba have come full circle. In the late 1950s, Cuba welcomed 1 million tourists a year, half of them from the United States. Castro railed against those tourist establishments during the 1959 revolution. His supporters trashed the casinos and every sign of the wealthy establishment, even the city's parking meters. Today, Castro wants to make tourism the city's lifeblood again. Cuba hopes to pack in another 1 million tourists in 1995, mostly from Latin America and Europe. In fact, the tourist hotels are the only place to find Cuba's best food. And in a kind of tourist apartheid, Cubans are not welcome. It is a sad hypocrisy that angered a family of Miami exiles we found returning to Havana for the first time since they fled in 1961.
When I came here, I invited my sister who lives here to the hotel to eat dinner. But when she arrived, they told her she could not come in.
And we left here about, it's going to be 33 years in next month. And we were undesirable then. But now we're very desirable because we bring dollars into the country. And that's very sad.
Along with tourism, Castro is hoping to make his hospitals and medicine part of Cuba's salvation. He wants Havana especially to be a world center for biotechnology. Already, Cuban scientists have invented an interferon used in Sweden, Chile, and Panama, a cream to keep scars from developing after burns, also vaccines for hepatitis B and meningitis. Still, all the technology seems a bit useless in a country where aspirin, Band-Aids, and even basic antibiotics arrive mostly from relief packages.
Va contando los errores que se van cometiendo.
Cuban doctors lately have been treating the victims of the Soviet Union's disaster at Chernobyl. Several Latin American countries routinely send patients with complicated problems to Cuba for special treatment. Mobile's delegation has proudly told these facts at a tour of a state-of-the-art psychiatric hospital. We also hear a testimony to socialist medicine and socialism itself.
Because we can show them anytime that we can gather at the Revolution Square or in the streets in Havana, 1 million people in a rally to back up the revolution.
American companies are already waiting at the gate for the day the embargo is lifted or Fidel Castro is removed from power. McDonald's already has 40 franchise applications on file. United Airlines has bought up Pan Am's old Havana routes. Cruise ships report they could have vacation packages set up here within a month. And analysts predict that an open Cuba after the embargo could become a $2 billion market for everything from grocery store chains to 33 years worth of fresh paint.
Havana needs investment. They need a lot of entrepreneurial activities. Mobilians can lend some expertise. They can lend some advice. I have a lot of ideas, and so does Mike Dow and many other people that would help them.
Those words of friendship, though, are not easy for Cuban exiles, like Raul Oyarzun.
I remember New Year's Day, 1959.
Oyarzun was barely a teenager the day Castro and his troops entered Havana, but the images are vivid.
I remember my mother about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning listened to airplanes, and my granddaddy said, "There goes Batista." The next thing I know, he's gone. Little by little, I would say about 3 or 4 months later, when we begin to see about all the executions and all the different people that were being apprehended, and I could describe that as a reign of terror.
Castro would soon nationalize the family's export business. By late 1960, life as the Oyarzuns had known it was over.
And that's the reason I come to the United States, because here we are. I was 13 years old, my brother was 14, and when my grandmother was checking my uniform, she found, papers, leaflets that were anti-Castro. My daddy looked at that, and he got very concerned, and in a week we were in the United States.
Raul arrived in the States deathly afraid President Kennedy would drop the bomb on his parents, who remained in Havana. He thought he would be here only 6 months.
I came here on the 29th of October, 1960. All I knew how to say was 6 months. My daddy told me, I said, whenever they ask you, you say 6 months. You know, so I remember going through the customs lady, and she said, I don't know what she said, but I said 6 months. Anyway, it's been the longest 6 months of my life. It's been 35 years now.
Oyarson became an outspoken critic of Castro, even as a student in the 1960s at what is now Faulkner State College. Today, he is still a critic, this time of Mayor Mike Dowell's new alliance with Havana.
He is making friends with the wrong people. You know, Mobile will always be associated with the city who made friends with Castro.
Jose Lacalle, a former Cuban sugar executive, is also critical of Mobile's step into the international spotlight.
These people are being used. There's no question in my mind about it, because Castro is not going to let anybody take the show away from him. And the thought that lifting the embargo is going to undermine him is just ridiculous, because it's going to strengthen him.
Scary because we knew there was something happening there. All of a sudden, the following 2 or 3 days, we saw start seeing tanks.
George Subirats calls Mobile home today. But in 1959, he was a young boy living in a chaotic Havana. Life under the revolution was dramatic for the family. Schools and churches were closed. Then, a day Subirats will never forget, April 17, 1961.
I was watching TV, and all of a sudden, it's a news flash, and we see Fidel Castro with his cigar in his mouth, sitting on top of a tank, aiming at the Bay of Pigs.
Subirats' 18-year-old cousin would be killed on that beach. It was the family's darkest day.
So from that moment, 1961 of April, we knew that Cuba was not going to be the same. And it was scary. At that point, no churches were open, no schools were open. And things got real bad. We started seeing killing in the streets. We realized that was the time for us to leave.
Subirats and his family left in stages. He ended up in a Birmingham foster home. 33 years later, he's never been back to his homeland, but his feelings run strong, especially after the events of the last 2 weeks. He still does not want the embargo lifted.
Not until Castro makes a move and says, yes, I'm willing to step down, or he gets killed, or somebody just by might takes over that country. Then that day, when that comes, then I say, hey, Mobile, you're a port city, you got a lot to gain, go for it. 100%.
Now America is faced with thousands of desperate Cuban refugees. How to deal with them, where to put them. Even more desperate, perhaps, are those left behind, wondering who will save Cuba, whether she can save herself. As of tonight, 32,000 Cubans have set sail for Florida and freedom on anything that floats. Thousands of them are being detained at Guantanamo Bay under the new U.S. policy that for the first time in 33 years no longer gives Cubans special asylum. Talks continue in New York. The United States is offering to grant more permanent visas. The Cubans say any solution has to include lifting the embargo. So what happens next? Is Cuba the next Haiti? A recent study by the Rand Corporation argues Havana is drifting toward uncontrolled violence, that possible U.S. military action may be inevitable. There is one sure thing. As our two countries struggle toward an answer, the Cuban crisis may only be just beginning. Good night.